Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, defining concepts in current media. I am your host, Chris Angle. I am the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is The Philosophical Equations of Economics. These books are available online, free for viewing, at www.philosophypublishing.com. They are also available free upon request as an attachment to an email, which is posted at the philosophypublishing.com website. Along with me are our panelists. Mark Brennan, professor at the Stern School of Business, New York University. He is also the American editor of the Quarterly Review of London, England, established 1809. Also with us is Rick Samuelson, graduated from Yale, has an MBA from Wharton, and an MA from Tufts. He is also retired head of securities, UBS Japan. And now to the purpose of the philosophical angle, which is to examine the nature of the concepts being used in current media and compare the essence of the concept with the usage and circumstances in which the term is being used. The format of the philosophical angle is that your host will bring forth an opening statement on the nature of the concept for your consideration, and our distinguished panel will react with their criticisms, questions, their own definitions, etc. This week, the subject of usage will be American exceptionalism. In the September 1st issue of the Wall Street Journal, there was an article entitled Obama and the Burden of Exceptionalism by Shelby Steele. Within this article is the declaration that Mr. Obama came of age in a bubble of post-60s liberalism that conditioned him to be an adversary of American exceptionalism. Steele states that American exceptionalism is the use of individual initiative as the engine of development within a society that strives to ensure individual freedom through the rule of law. Over time, this society will become great. Steele equates exceptionalism with individual initiative and the rule of law. Well, what is American exceptionalism, which, as Mr. Steele notes, can be found in the exceptionalism of military, economic, and cultural preeminence? Let's begin our inquiry. Exceptionalism is created by individualism, which is the adherence of a society to the importance of the individual as its primary concern, as opposed to the state. Individualism is the creation of a social environment whereby society optimizes the freedom of its members. The opposite of individualism would be statism, which would optimize the social environment of the state, or that is, the government. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're wondering, how does a society optimize individualism through freedom, and why does this necessarily produce exceptionalism? Well, optimizing freedom is done by allowing the individual to formulate his decisions and then allow him to execute these decisions. Further, once the individual's decisions are made and executed, then the results of those decisions are allowed to accrue to the decision maker, and these results of one's decision may be both action and material. That is, an individual may own both one's thoughts and actions through one's effort, which may result in ownership of his services and material, that is, his property, that is a result of his thoughts and efforts. Of course, there has to be some restraints so that crime and chaos do not erupt. And these restraints are codified in the laws that a democracy will produce. In summary, there are two dimensions to individualism. First is the making of a decision, and second is the effectuation of the decision to receive the results, that is, the reward. We do things to get the reward, which is our sacrifice. Thus, in order to make individualism work, we need to provide an environment whereby the individual makes the decisions and then is allowed to receive the results of those decisions. As decisions are made for the benefit of the individuals that make these decisions in general, they tend to produce good for the individuals. And if we total up all the good for all the individuals, it will equal more good than any government or institution could produce for the society. Thus, individualism is the society's optimization of man's freedom to choose and the right to own the results of his decision pertaining both his labor and property. The opposite of this would be the optimization of the state's or the government's ability to choose what it wants to do and its right to own the results of its decision pertaining to both its labor and property to the exclusion of the individual. And now to the important part of your question. How does individualism beget exceptionalism? What is the relationship between the two concepts? What is it within individualism that necessarily produces exceptionalism? Great question. In a society that focuses on individualism, or that is, does not oppress individualism by the use of the overwhelming presence of the state, which would interdict the invention and the accumulation of knowledge. Knowledge and the good of society of individualism occur at a greater rate of speed. I can hear your response. You are all going, what? What did he say? I'll explain. In a society that leaves its individuals to themselves, each individual is therefore committed to facing all of its everyday problems by themselves. As such, the individuals and their problems are isolated in their problems and in their respective, let's call it, transactional decisional cells. Each individual will therefore gather and deploy as much as possible all relevant information to solve their problems. The individual problems and their decisions are theirs alone. And so, the individual, to solve his problems, to effect his decisions, will gather and deploy to the greatest extent that is possible all his effort, time, information, and knowledge. This deployment of his resources will be to effect his solutions to the best of his ability. Now you ask, how can we be sure that the individual will try to the best of his ability? Maybe he cannot, and needs help from others, such as from the government. Well, we know the individual will try to the best of his ability because the individual, from the moment he is born, tries to do that which promotes his survival and bring himself up away from misery. We all want what we perceive as good for us, and we know better than anyone else that which we want. So now you say, perhaps we may make mistakes, or worse yet, fail. Perhaps we should have others, such as the government, help us and guide us. In theory, we could suppose that sounds like a solution. But others of the government are human also. And so in the aggregate, not perhaps in every case, such as for the insane or mentally disabled, we will employ our own effort, time, and knowledge to effect that best answer or solution to our goals and objectives. We solve our problems and gain our goals as individuals because we optimize our knowledge and effort to do so. And as Frederick Hayek pointed out in his book, The Road to Serfdom, the individuals as a group will amass more knowledge than any centralized organization, such as a government, to solve the problems and effect the solutions. Why is this, you ask? It is because a centralized group, that is, a group smaller in number, cannot amass the information that the individuals of the group can collectively in total. It stands to reason. If there are 100 people in society and 20 in government, and if the 100 people have 10 problems, goals, and objectives to solve, that will mean 1,000 individual issues. Those 1,000 problems will require a certain amount of knowledge of all types, and this knowledge will be diverse. Should we have our government be the provider of the solutions, their resource of only 20 people will have to gather and deploy the knowledge of 100. Which would you expect to be more effective? Of course, the individuals of the society. They will lead us to exceptionalism. Now, to your thoughts. First, Mark, why don't we start with you? Any comments in general on individualism begetting exceptionalism and Shelby Steele's article?
Sure, but I think that the way you've painted it and the way you've kind of, I feel that you've proposed it is that you've left out a lot of mediating institutions that a conservative would object to their omission, and you've kind of presented us with a Randian individualism, which I see as just harmful to society. You've left out family, clan, tribe, state, nation, and we are not all just individuals pursuing our own self-interest. We are bound and helped by institutions like the family. I mean, just to keep it something where you might be able to see common ground. Somebody who's going to take his savings and spend it on a round-the-world trip every year and not invest in the tuition or care of his children is pursuing his individual aims, but he's not helping society or doing what's right.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Absolutely. Individualism, I would suppose really the individual, we can expand it to the individual, the component of individualism is, of course, the family.
Right, and well, okay, so as long as we're on that same page, and we probably then, we would then in unison disagree with when Hillary says it only takes a village. So there are rights and responsibilities that are due and owed to the family. But I think, once we start talking about the village, that's when you're talking about statism, and that's where, I join you in full force in opposing it. But how this gets us to exceptionalism, if I think of exceptionalism as kind of in its, the gist of it or the essence of it is kind of what I've always read is the American genius for freedom has led us to, be different from all the other countries. Well, first of all, every country is different from every other country, so probably the terminology isn't helping much. But a lot of the things you pointed out, that led to economic growth and rule of law and stuff like that and spread of culture, I'd have a hard time saying that the British Empire didn't do a better job of it than we did.
Okay, interesting statement. Let's take that statement, and before we go there, let's go to Rick and see if he has any general comments, and then we'll come back to that statement about the British Empire. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, sure. Going back for a moment to Mr. Steele's article, there are several themes in that article. One of them that caught my attention was this notion that the Obama approach and his liberal colleagues debases the notion of merit, as, and that ties into obviously your discussion of individualism as the driving force behind greater prosperity in a society. And it occurs to me that one of the phenomena that's certainly been the background behind the tendency of many liberals to undermine this notion of merit, that everybody has to kind of be mediocre together, is this kind of vast reservoir of white guilt that enables this culture of political correctness that you see at the universities and in the media. It enables certainly any frank discussion on the part of the liberal establishment about what really it would take to improve the educational system in the country. It has many, many ramifications, but it's kind of the elephant sitting in the room, and that it can't be addressed candidly very easily, I think is it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy in the national public debate.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, can I exfoliate that elephant that Rick's referring to a little bit?
Sure, go right ahead.
You know, this very dangerous notion that Rick was pointing out, that egalitarianism, which came out of the French Revolution, is kind of where classical liberalism and libertarianism and individualism will ultimately lead you. Because if you're sitting there and you're saying, you know, if you have an IQ, say, of 140 and you're lucky and you're successful in business, your natural inclination is to pay for your children to go to better schools and to perpetuate, you know, a system whereby your family is going to succeed. Ultimately, that would end up in, if you take it to its limit, we'd kind of be an aristocratic society. But instead, we've had people like Obama come in who play the game very well and have decided that we must be leveled. And this is a dangerous thought that came out of the French Revolution, still won't die, no matter how many, you know, silver spikes we drive to its heart. And so we've tried to level and level and level, and all we've done is tried to make the dumbest members of our society a little bit smarter, and try to make the most timid members of our society a little bit less timid. But we've done nothing at the top end to help those who, you know, to support those who are striving for excellence. And that's where this leveling factor, where you take a successful businessman, he's now working to support several people to bring up a couple of people who are just not going to succeed in the society because we have just thrown merit down the toilet. Except, of course, for, you know, Obama and Samantha Powers and Hillary Clinton, who all played the right game and went to the right schools. So we can't get rid of this. And I would say, if in any way, that's how the United States is exceptional, in that we are willing to be suicidal with our own offspring.
Okay, good point. Rick, do you have any further thoughts on your going forward, on, especially about the egalitarianism of the French Revolution? I thought that was something we might explore after Mark's comment about the British Empire also.
Well, I just find the, you know, there's obviously been a resurgence of a vigorous conservative point of view, and it's kind of arisen slowly over a number of years, since the days of Buckley and so forth, and that has been an extremely important counterweight. But I guess what worries me is the institutionalization of the liberal point of view, to the extent that it has been institutionalized so broadly, and that there isn't a vigorous debate allowed within many of the important institutions in our country, starting with academia, but certainly within the media. And that's frankly why Fox News is such a sensation. They broke with the mold, and that can be a break with the mold. I mean, when you consider, you know, the kinds of discussions that were going on at the Constitutional Convention, I mean, those are biting, very angry discussions, frankly, where the debate was nothing if not vigorous, to the point of being insulting. And that is, in a sense, one of the genius moments in the establishment of the American enterprise, namely that a sensible, consensual means of governing ourselves came out of raucous debate.
Right, and and you, Mark, is bringing up is the topic of the British Empire, which we want to get back to. But you, Rick, you've I think brought up something even more important that we should explore immediately. Is did the Constitution, as it was written, did it have did the founders have in mind individualism when they wrote it, and the protection of individualism being able to go to exceptionalism? Mark, you're a historian and scholar, and perhaps we could start with you. Do you is that a possibility that the founders actually wrote the Constitution with individualism and exceptionalism in their minds?
I don't know if they had individualism in mind, but when they talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was really the pursuit of property, and when they try to guarantee the right of free speech and the right to defend yourself and the whole first 10 amendments, I think they were writing in an environment where it was less about individualism, because remember, Adam Smith only writes The Wealth of Nations in 1776, so
right.
That's not going to be driving this document. And that's kind of what starts pushing liberalism and individualism and classical liberal economics. So, but they were writing, at a time when family and still really clan was an important social institution. So, I wish we could go back and ask them, were you talking about just creating a nation of John Galts, or were you talking about building a nation of, families and communities? And my guess would be the latter, but, maybe a wise Latina would disagree with me, or agree with me, I'm not sure.
And just for our listening audience, when you mention John Galt, you're referring to the Ayn Rand figure in Fountainhead?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you there. So did you conclude your comment, or?
I did conclude my comment, and as I'm sitting here, we don't have to discuss it, but the more I think about the British Empire, the more happy I am with what they spread around the world as opposed to what we're spreading around the world today.
Right, and
we're the United States is an appendage. We are the British Empire. This is the British Empire right here and now.
And right, and getting back to that comment, why do you suppose that is? What's the correlation and the relationship between the British Empire and today's U.S. society?
Well, the U.S. society arose out of the British Empire, and we seceded from the British Empire. But maybe it would be interesting to see in 50 or 100 years who wins the race, China or India. And I would like to see India win, because although both are culturally foreign to me, India is a little bit closer linguistically, and there is some semblance of British rule of law there, and a system that's just kind of closer to our Western system. So, accounting came from Britain, went around the world, accounting rules, and it's just worked better.
Okay, you're just talking about the influence that the British Empire had throughout its world, to actually bringing its culture throughout the world in really its educational aspects and its rule of law.
Yeah.
And
we probably should be tying this back to American exceptionalism.
Right.
So we were standing on the shoulders of giants, and claiming that we did all this. I'm a patriot, but I'm not a nationalist, and I would like to take credit for the good we've done, but I'm not going to pound my chest over things that perhaps where credit is due to other nations, or to even I'll recognize that other nations have their own specific background and ideology and evolution.
Okay. Great concept that we're just sort of a continuation of the British Empire in the sense that we bring and spread our culture throughout the world. Positive, and part of that culture is an individualism which is producing exceptionalism. As long as we maintain it and don't get and have our political establishment intercede and interdict that process. So
Obama and his friends have problems with exceptionalism, because it brought us things like slavery and imperialism. I would also point out, that Spain and Portugal were the two biggest slave trading countries, and England was the first one to abolish it. So, we got to look at these things in their historical perspective, not in today's, sipping a glass of Chardonnay and looking back on history and judging people that way.
Okay, I didn't quite get your statement on the individuals versus exceptionalism. Did you agree that individualism can produce exceptionalism, or there's a caveat there that I didn't recognize?
I think individualism, as Tocqueville pointed out, is part of it. The United States, he saw, individualism, populism, laissez-faire, liberty, all kind of summing up to a genius for freedom. So individualism is part, an inextricable part of that equation that, led to the way the United States evolved.
Yes. Okay. Do you think there's any relationship between peace and individualism? Who would like to handle that, Rick or Mark?
Go ahead, Rick. I feel like I'm hogging the conversation.
Well, there's peace, and then there's national interest. I think no sensible nation can make simply peace an overarching national objective unless it's through the prism of national interest. Otherwise, a nation might be tempted to simply lay down all its arms, all right, unilaterally. So I guess I remain somewhat cynical about the behavior of the other nations in the world that inhabit this world. And I think one of the outstanding features of the United States, and something, again, we need to be proud of, is the fact that, at the end of World War II, not only did we not invade and take over our former enemies, we provided funding to rebuild their economies. This is an act of, you could call it self-interested generosity that is not frequent in the history of the world. And to me, it's emblematic of American exceptionalism on a national scale.
Great point. I fully agree, and it's probably never been done before in any other society, by any other society. And I would love to continue this topic. We only have probably another 30 seconds or so to go. And because there's some great questions like, does individualism, similar to the paternalism that is being produced in Europe? And so we'll have to leave this for a topic later on, and we'll see you all later. And I want to thank Mark and Rick for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.